Is that Sierra that you had testified to with respect to those injuries?
Yes.
All right. With respect to those injuries, is there any way that you can tell whether or not those closed fractures that you discussed were post-mortem or pre? In other words, before or after death?
It's difficult to determine whether it's pre-mortem, post-mortem, but based on the injuries of the other members of the family, it's likely that the broken femur and the tibias might have been, was likely occurred that when she was ejected and she might have hit into like the rocks in the body of water, that's where the fractures would have likely would have occurred, because if she had fractures and the other members of the family had no fractures of their extremities, it's likely scenario that once she was ejected and hit into rocks or any or into the body of water with rocks underneath, that's likely what the fractures may have occurred.
All right. Thank you for that. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your testimony here today?
I think that's all I can think of.
All right, Doctor, then thank you very much, and you are excused. Thank you. You may step down. I'm next going to call as a witness Deputy Adam Beck of the Clark County Sheriff's Office of Vancouver, Washington. Yes. Yeah. Raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated. State your name. Spell your name for the record, please.
My name is Adam Beck, A-D-A-M-B-E-C-K.
I'm going to pause just a moment while they put up a couple of exhibits, and we'll get right into having some discussions. And is it appropriate to call you Deputy Beck?
I am both a deputy and a detective, so whatever you want to do.
Call you Detective Beck then.
Okay.
Can you tell us your occupation, please?
I am a deputy sheriff with the Clark County Sheriff's Office, Southwest corner, Washington State, for those of you who we're just across the river from Portland, Oregon. Been a deputy sheriff for about 5 years now. Prior to that, I was a reserve deputy sheriff with the Clark County Sheriff's Office for about 4 years. So I'm volunteering as a reserve deputy sheriff. In the 5 years that I've been a deputy sheriff, I'm now a major crimes detective with the Sheriff's Office. So I'm one of several detectives who worked on this case as part of the Clark County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Unit.
And if you wouldn't mind telling, we understand how long you've worked for Clark County. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background, training, and experience as it relates to being a deputy or reserve with Clark? And then if there's any post-high school education, let the jury know that as well.
So to become a reserve deputy sheriff, I go through a reserve deputy police academy. And then once you get hired, I went to the full-time state academy, which was about 5 months. State of Washington, get certified as a full-time police officer. Since then, I've had training in homicide investigations, interviewing, crime scene investigation, documentation, stuff like that.
All right. Can you tell us your assignment? And I know, being from a different state, and what initially brought you into the Hart investigation? If you could just let the jury know how that happened.
Yeah, definitely. So I was first contacted on the 28th, so a couple days after the incident. We were contacted by the Sheriff's Office down here in the California Highway Patrol They had located the vehicle and some occupants in the vehicle, and their kind of preliminary investigation indicated that there might be some children who were missing. And so they asked us for assistance to try and find some evidence around the home where the family lived in our jurisdiction to see if we could try and locate if the children were there or any indication where they might have been, or maybe possibly some explanation as to what happened or why it happened.
All right, and Detective Beck, were you then specifically assigned to this case and to accomplish a number of the tasks that Mendocino County requested of you and the Highway Patrol?
Yes, I was. So I was the lead detective, but we had several detectives I worked with who all did different tasks. So we all wrote reports. I got them all right here, and I've read them all, so I can kind of testify about what our team did.
And again, I've seen you back in the past, in the back, and as the jurors all know, we do allow hearsay. So instead of bringing down 25 detectives from Clark County, Washington, we're going to rely on Detective Beck to tell us about the investigation and the significant findings, even of those of some of your fellow deputies and detectives up there. Detective Beck has been kind enough to prepare what's called a final summary of the Hart investigation, and I think it appropriate that we put it up there. We'll have it introduced into evidence, but I'm going to ask him questions about it, and it provides a very nice script for me to ask questions as appropriate for you to hear what Clark County did with respect to this investigation. So I'm just going to start out and have you testify as to that. It's not even a bullet point. It appears to be a year, 2011, and tell us the significance of that year and what you put there, and explain it to the jury, and I'll ask questions as we go. Definitely.
So this timeline is a result of the investigation. So as we started the investigation, some of the information in this timeline we didn't learn until later. I guess I'll just start off by saying the 2011 date, when we began our investigation, there had been some complaints to Child Protective Services. And when they received the complaints, they did some investigating amongst Child Protective Services and learned there was some issues against the family in 2011 in Minnesota. Officer Slates with the California Highway Patrol probably can testify in a little more detail about specifically what those complaints were and what happened.
I'll get into that with him. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For purposes of us, what you knew in Clark County and what you did.
Yep. So just basically, there were some complaints about the family withholding food with some of the kids and some physical abuse of the kids. One of the mothers, Sarah Hart, ended up being arrested and convicted of assaulting one of the children.
All right, and then just continue down so that your next point is 2013.
So in 2013, the state of Oregon had opened up a CPS investigation into the family. Similar accusations of withholding food from the children from the school. The family was living in West Lynn, which is just across the river from where we are at the time. So the State of Oregon CPS did an investigation. They had a doctor evaluate the children. They interviewed the children. They interviewed the parents. They did a pretty extensive report. And at the end of it, they determined that they couldn't determine that there was any abuse taking place, and it was closed in 2013.
But there was, and I'm reading from your outline, I was going to ask you that the there was an evaluation of the kids, and they were below average in what fashion?
I'd have to, Officer Slates probably could talk in more detail about their determination. I got a copy of one of their reports, so I didn't. I don't have the full thing, but the doctor who did the evaluation made comments about not knowing the child's history, and that although they were smaller than normal, it was still within some acceptable range.
All right. Well, then we'll get that out of. You prepared this night's outline, and that's what I'm kind of going on. So, certainly appropriate for you to indicate to me that there's a a better witness that I'm going to be calling
Yeah,
that might have some additional information that's appropriate. So I am still going to rely on it a bit as we go. So the next entry then is 2017. And can you tell us what significance that is in your outline and your reports?
So investigating this case, began to do research on the family and the property there in Woodland, Washington, which is in our jurisdiction of Clark County. And so one of the things that we learned is that the family purchased a house in May of 2017, so about a year prior to all this. Later, when we interviewed a neighbor who shares a driveway with the family, you can see their driveway off the map behind me, commented that although the family moved in about a year before, they didn't see many kids outside playing. They were told that a family was moving in. They seemed kind of surprised that they never really saw the family outside or activity. They also reported seeing a white sedan and a gold Yukon SUV coming and going from the property.
What I'm going to do, since you referenced that, I think we've marked that, if you could help me out, Exhibit 7, is that 7 or 8 for the record?
This one's 7. I don't know if that's a 6, maybe? Or 15.
Well, I know we
15.
already have a 6, so that's got to be something else.
15.
All right, so since you referenced that, why don't you stand up, and if you could put your back to me so that you can indicate to the jury and the jury can see, just describe what's depicted in that photograph, Exhibit 15.
Yeah, so up here is the main public road, and there's a private gravel driveway off the road leading up. This right here, it's labeled as the Hart home. The driveway splits off, pulls up, there's a garage and the normal residence and a deck off the end of it. The driveway also splits here and goes to a neighbor's house, which is right here. There's a row of shrubbery and trees, so they're not really visible from each other, but they share the driveway and they're a pretty close vicinity.
All right, just while you're standing there, is there was a block wall somewhere between the two driveways? Is that depicted in that?
Yes, you can kind of see the blocks here. There's it's on a hillside. The house sits up above the driveway. And as it goes down, somebody put in a block wall at some point to kind of level off an area down here. It's those blocks you can get at Home Depot, the concrete blocks, you just stack them. One of the things that we observed when we ended up serving a search warrant on the house was that as the block wall came out to the driveway, the corner of the wall looked like it was knocked over. The blocks were on the ground, and it was kind of the corner near the driveway. So one of the theories was that it would be possible if a car was backing out or something in a hurry, it might have toppled over the blocks as it was exiting the driveway.
All right, and kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but you had interviewed the neighbors, had you not? And what had they said with respect to their observations?
I did. So the neighbors had, I guess I can start back. The neighbors were the ones, these neighbors here were the ones who had initially called CPS. They had some concerns. One of the children had come over to them earlier and asked them for some food, making comments about the parents withholding food from them. And so about a week later, he came back and asked where the food was, and she hadn't purchased the food yet, but thought, okay, this has kind of risen to the level of I need to report this to somebody. So she calls and reports it to CPS. That same day, CPS comes out to contact the Hart family here. And as they're coming up, they get confused as to which house is which, and they actually come to the home belonging to the neighbor. And while they're talking to her, they see a gold Yukon, not knowing it's the car, come pull up to the Hart home. After they're talking with her, she points out that's the car and that's the house over there. They go to contact the family, but nobody answers the door. The CPS worker walks around to the back, knocks on the door, nobody answers. She doesn't see anybody, so she ends up leaving. The neighbors report that the next day they noticed that the car was gone and that the blocks were knocked over. And I asked them, is that something you would have noticed prior? And they said yes. So it's likely that it happened overnight at some point when the gold Yukon disappeared.
And it's important to let the jury know, what was that date that CPS worker in Washington went out to the house and spoke with the neighbors?
So that was on the 23rd of March.
All right.
So the morning of the 24th is when they noticed that the blocks were gone.
All right. You can sit down in your seat if you'd
Okay.
like, and I'll get you popping up. So we're going to get back to your outline a little bit, but I thought it important, just as long as we had that outline there, that the jury could see the Hart House in Washington. All right. So you had mentioned they purchased the house in 2017, and did your investigation lead you to understand that they moved from Oregon to Washington and purchased that home?
Yes, that's correct. The home that they were living at in Oregon in West Lynn, which is where the previous CPS complaint, they left that home and moved to our jurisdiction in Clark
All
County.
right.
So,
And then, all right, there's another 2017 on the outline, which is marked Exhibit 7, I believe. But if you wouldn't mind, just tell us, as part of your investigation, the significance of those entries.
yes. So while I was interviewing the same neighbor over here, the summer of 2017, they reported that Hannah had come to their house in the middle of the night and woken them up. Banging on the door. As soon as they opened it up, she came in and said she ran upstairs to the bedroom and started saying, "Don't tell my parents I'm here," something to that effect. Kind of seemed in a panic. They thought this was weird. A few minutes later, they heard the family calling for her, and eventually the family came over, and they said, "Yeah, Hannah's here." Hannah came down, and they had a conversation. And the family apologized, and Hannah went back home. The next morning, the family came back over with all the children and knocked on the neighbor's door again at early in the morning, at 6 a.m. the next morning, to apologize. Again, the neighbors kind of described this just as bizarre. They weren't really sure what to think about it.
And did the neighbors say anything about what either the adults said about the children?
They said they had explanations. They said that they adopted the kids. They come from traumatic families and had some mental health issues, and that they're from prior to being adopted, and that's kind of how they explained the bizarre behavior.
Now, understand, this is a hearsay statement, but that's acceptable. So that is not information that Detective Beck got directly from the Harts. That is something that the neighbors got from the Harts, and then recounted it to the various detectives and people of authority in Washington. So I just want to always make it clear to you as jurors where the information came from. All right, let's move along to March 15th of 2018. And again, we're doing it in a little different kind of format, but I have this nice outline that I kind of like to follow that you've prepared, so I'm going to kind of leave it to you. Tell us the significance of that date of March 15th of 2018 and why you put those entries, and then we'll explain them.
So, and I mentioned this earlier, this is the date that the neighbor, one of the children went to the neighbor's house and mentioned asking for food. He mentioned that the parents punished them by withholding food and asked her to purchase several items of food, and asked her to leave them outside their house somewhere where he could access. She said that she didn't purchase the items yet, and he returned on Friday the 23rd, which is what I talked about, saying, "Hey, have you purchased these items yet?" And at that point, she got concerned enough, and that's when she reported it to CPS.
All right. Did she? Did those neighbors, and they're the same neighbors that talked about the brick wall or the
Yes.
rock wall or whatever? Did those neighbors say that they gave any food to? And it was Devontae, the one of the
Correct.
children?
It was Devontae. They mentioned that they didn't see many of the kids outside very often, but every once in a while they would see Devontae out. He would bring the garbage to and from the street, or out working in the yard, and they kind of would strike up a conversation with him every once in a while. So they had somewhat of a relationship with him, and they thought maybe that's why he came to them asking for the food.
Right. And all right, so that event, and then we're on to the 23rd of March, and you had just testified in that entry is because that is the date that he came back asking
Correct.
if there had been, if she had purchased the food?
That's right. And so when it kind of rose to the level where they felt the need to report it to CPS, so they called, and that same day CPS came out. That's when the investigator was unable to get anybody to answer the door and left her card in the door.
I just want to know, and can you put the connection between that same vehicle, it's 2003 GMC Yukon, is that the vehicle that was in the driveway at the?
So I can't say for certain, but I do know that they're associated with that vehicle. It had a red kayak tied on the top, which the neighbors said they just drove around with the kayak on the top, which was always unique. CPS worker also saw the red kayak on the top. We found the kayak in the backyard of the house, and the vehicle is similar to the vehicle that they found at the bottom of the cliff that is registered to them.
All right.
So
we'll clear that up with another witness in this particular case. I thought perhaps Detective Beck could do that for us. All right. Then let's, moving on to March 23rd, and if you can talk about the investigation, your findings as to Sarah Hart's employment and anything of significance that you learned about that.
yeah, certainly. So Sarah Hart was a manager at a local department store. Her coworkers report that she worked a normal shift that day, and then she leaves work at about 17:26, which is about 5:30 in the evening, and is driving the white sedan, which we found at the house when we did the search warrant.
With respect to Sarah, you interviewed, or did you interview various ones of her coworkers? Mm-hmm. All right. And tell us about what you learned about her reputation for being timely and being an employee one way or another.
There was another detective actually that interviewed the coworkers, and she was told by coworkers that she, while at work, they kind of had some indications there might have been some problems at home, arguing with her wife.
Jennifer.
Jennifer, yeah.
Yes.
Is that what you're?
What I was getting into more, and I'm just looking at all the records, it had appeared that she was a very good employee who's certainly on time at all times, and so if you could.
Definitely. So that was on the 23rd. She leaves work about 5:30. We have video showing her leave work, and so one of our goals was to just kind of see if we could document exactly the last time she was seen alive, and that's what we were able to determine. Later that night, early the next morning, on the 24th at about 3 in the morning, Sarah sends a text to a coworker saying that she's too sick to work that day, which the coworker described as strange. That's not like her to not show up to work, especially at such a last moment. So then later that morning, the neighbors that's when they notice that the Yukon is gone and that the blocks are knocked over. Yeah.
All right. Then let's fast forward to, let's see, March 25th of 2018. There's an entry there. Can you tell us the significance of that entry?
Yeah, so later on in the investigation, as we started researching the family, we served a search warrant on the house and found some financial information. And the California Highway Patrol officers actually covered a Safeway rewards card from the vehicle. And we were able, one of the detectives, Detective Mitchen, in our unit was able to contact Safeway, who was able to track that rewards number to find video of a female that we believe to be seen purchasing some food at a Safeway in Fort Bragg, which is just up the road.
And so to be clear, your testimony is that the California Highway Patrol recovered at the scene of the incident in Westport off the cliff a Safeway card.
Correct.
A Safeway rewards card.
Correct.
All right. And then that was turned over to your agency?
Or
a
picture of the number.
identified.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then based on that, it would track, is that how it does, track if it was used at any Safeways? And in fact, there was some evidence that it was used at a Safeway in Fort Bragg. Is that correct?
That's right.
And on what date
in the
was
morning?
that?
On the 25th.
On the 25th. All right. All right, then moving right along to the 26th. And let me get back. In the outline that you've prepared, it indicates that that individual seen at the Safeway was in fact Jennifer Hart. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. All right. Moving on to the date of the 26th of March of 2018, you have some entries, and if you could tell us the significance of those, and then perhaps we'll ask some questions about that.
Yeah, so on the 26th, so this is a couple days later, CPS returns to the Woodland House. They weren't able to get a hold of anybody the first time, and obviously all this is with hindsight. At the time, we didn't know anything about them leaving or anything like that. The neighbors hadn't reported that. So CPS returns to the house to try and continue their investigation about the alleged withholding of food. And again, nobody answers the door. They do note that the Yukon that was there the previous visit was no longer there. And they contact the sheriff's office, the Clark County Sheriff's Office, because at this point they're concerned that they're unable to get a hold of family. And a deputy, Clark County Sheriff's Office deputy, arrives, and again, nobody's answering the door and nobody appears to be home. So,
all right, and did the CPS worker indicate that she saw her card still in the door?
yes, that's right. So she left her card in the door a couple days prior, and she said it was still in the same place as if somebody, and it was in the door crack of the door. So when you open the door, it would fall down. So and it was still there.
All right. I want to get back a little bit because in reading the reports also, the prior time when she was talking with the neighbors and she saw that SUV pull into the driveway, and you indicated that she had gone over to have a discussion, and she put a card in the door, did she not, at that time?
Yes, yes.
All right. And then went around the back of the house and nobody answered the door?
That's right. That's
All right.
what she reported.
And at some point she returned to the house and that card was gone, is that correct?
That's right.
All right. And then later she went back again and put a card in the door?
No, I think it was just that second time.
I see. All right. Let's move then to, again, the 26th, and that is, there's an entry and it relates to her coworkers. So can you tell us the significance of that particular entry and how it related to your investigation?
So she returned at 10 o'clock in the morning, the CPS worker did, and that's when they called the sheriff's deputy, who found that nobody was home. And then a little later that same day, one of Sarah's coworkers calls the sheriff's office and reports the unusual that Sarah had called in sick for work prior and she hasn't shown up since, and that they were concerned. And so they requested what's called a welfare check for law enforcement to go and knock on the door again. Again, nobody was home and nobody answered. About that same time is when the crash was discovered down here by the sheriff's office and the highway patrol down here, and started kind of putting the pieces together.
What I'd like you to do, if you can, is tell us what the days of the week are. So if Sarah Hart was seen leaving work on the 23rd, as you say, it got some video from whatever the store was to show her leaving. That was the 23rd?
That's right.
Was that a Friday night?
I believe, I don't have a calendar in front of me.
All right. What I'm just trying to think is what day, so that then we fast forward to the 26th, where she still hasn't shown up at work, and that's when her coworkers contacted the office for a welfare check. And a welfare check, describing to the jury, why don't you describe for them what a welfare check is?
Just if somebody's concerned, if something's unusual, family member or friend hasn't heard of a loved one in a while, or a coworker, and they just request the police officer to go knock on the door and just check and see if everything's all right. We're kind of limited in what we're allowed to do. There's no proof of criminal activity, but we're just kind of go knock on the door, see if we can answer the door if somebody's just sick or doesn't want to talk to somebody or what.
Okay. On the 26th is when it says LE is alerted. What is LE?
Law enforcement.
I see. And law enforcement up in Clark County Washington, is that correct?
So at about 1300, which is about 1 o'clock, is when the coworker called for the welfare check up in Clark County. And then a little bit later, my report says about 3:30 is when the crash is discovered here in California. But at that point, we're not talking to each other. We're separate. We're hundreds of miles away. So things are kind of happen simultaneously.
Just we've had marked it. It's not blown up, but it is a picture of that that block wall. And as you indicated, we're going to have that. Is that the block? The
Yes,
picture
that
of the
is.
block wall? Did you actually take that picture?
I did take that picture.
All right. So we'll just publish that to the jury, a picture of that. Yeah, you can. There are lots of ways. We call it publishing to the jury, and sometimes it's handing to a jury and they pass it down to each other, or sometimes it's as Mr. Biggs did. We just hold it in front of a jury.
If you look at it, you can kind of see that it's on the edge of the driveway, so you might have just caught the corner as you're backing down the driveway.
And that now will be Exhibit 16, as happens in all matters such as this. Things come in out of order. There's no significance to that. That is now a piece of evidence that you can review during your time deliberating. And I think the detective has testified to the significance, at least the potential significance is it may have shown haste. Is that?
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure. I mean, it could have been that the blocks just got kicked over when somebody was upset, but one of the theories is that it could have been when if a car was backing down the driveway and knocked it over, and it did happen overnight, the same night that the family car disappeared. So.
Then moving on, and law enforcement notified, and I'm assuming that's law enforcement all around, that there had been this motor vehicle incident in California involving the Harts, and you were notified of that.
Yeah, so late in the afternoon, as you heard the other officers testify, it went off into the evening down here in California. They were doing the recovery, attempting to recover the vehicle and the people who were in the vehicle. At that point, they're just starting to figure out, okay, what's the license plate, who's this car registered to? The next day is when we were contacted by the sheriff's office down here to help with the investigation, because they had learned that there was a family and that they believed that it was a family of 8 and that there were at least 3 people who were missing at that time. And so they asked for our help again to try and see if we could figure out where the 3 missing children were, and or if there was some kind of explanation. Like they testified there weren't skid marks, there was some strangeness about the site down here that they had questions about.
All right, and then in fact, did you conduct another welfare check at the Hart residence?
So yes, the sheriff's office went and found that there was nobody at the house. There were several animals that were left behind, and it just looked like the house was abandoned.
All right, and we are going to have, as I indicated, somebody from the California Highway Patrol as the lead investigator in this, is going to tie up a lot of loose ends that you may have. And I don't want to pick on Detective Beck, because there are some things that happen down here that he's not aware of, obviously. But what I do want to ask is, you mentioned as part of your investigation, did you learn that the Harts had some dogs?
We did. We checked the house, and from what we could determine, there may be some dogs that were still missing that may have been with the family in the car.
All right. And with respect to any other pets, when you went to the house, were there other pets inside the house?
There were other pets inside and out. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we had animal control come out. I believe there's some ducks or some chickens, and take possession of them to make sure that they were taken care of and fed.
There are some cats as well. Did you hear any?
Possibly. I don't remember.
At any rate, they were in the house. We will get it out of Inspector the
Slates.
slates, but did you have an opportunity to walk through the residence and make some observations?
I did. Detective Swinson with our office was the primary one at the house. Eventually, we ended up serving a search warrant at the house, which allowed us to collect evidence from the house and really document it. He walked through and took lots of pictures of different rooms, food in the refrigerator, the milk date. The date on the milk in the refrigerator was still current, and everything in the house looked relatively normal and clean. And I did walk through the house too.
All right. I think of some significance in your reports, and it may be in the investigator's Slate's report, as well as the fact that there were toothbrushes and a number of things in the residence that remained that perhaps indicated that somebody left very quickly without taking toiletries and that kind of thing. Is that?
Yeah. It's hard to say. The house was definitely very neat and orderly. There was also luggage in the garage. Typically, if a family will leave, they'll pack their clothing and items in the luggage. Toothbrushes left behind, food in the fridge, and then, like you said, there were several animals that were left behind too.
All right. And now moving on to March 29th as part of your investigation. Is that when the search warrant was served
That's
on
correct.
the residence?
Uh-huh.
And was that your search warrant that you had a Washington State judge sign and you
Yes, that's correct.
conducted? All right. In addition, there were other search warrants, I think, that took place. So as you say, one of your fellow detectives took a number of pictures. Did you seize any laptops, any pieces of communication, cell phones, anything such as that?
Yeah, so at the time, part of our investigation was to see if we could try and track where the family had been. And so one way you can do that is through bank statements or credit card statements. There were several bills, credit card bills, bank account information that we collected. We also collected some laptops, I believe an iPad, some other stuff that we would later process to try and get some clues as to maybe where they went or why whatever happened, or where the missing children may be.
And did you? I know I've seen it in the Officer Slate's report about research that took place on some of those devices. Did you review any of the research that was done on any of those electronic devices, iPads, or anything such as that?
No, I didn't. We collected them and I wrote search warrants for them, but then the data was then sent to Officer Slates, who was the primary investigator.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm. That's we're going to count on Officer Slates for lots of information.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we will certainly do. All right, then on 3:30, there is an entry about some financial leads. Can you tell us, as part of your investigation, what that entailed?
So again, Detective Mitchum in our office is kind of our fraud specialist. He's the one who was able to track the Safeway card, and he also started diving into their financials, looking for large cash withdrawals or some sort of indication that they were expecting either to go on a trip or made hotel reservations or anything like that, and he came up empty. Basically couldn't find anything in their bank accounts or credit cards to indicate anything was abnormal.
All right, and then on the 12th of April, you have an entry, and I think you went back to the residence, is that correct? Tell us the purpose for that.
So later on the 12th of April, we went back with some canine teams. At the time, still couldn't locate the missing children, and so one of the fears may have been that something may have happened at the house, and maybe there was somebody buried at the house or something like that. So did an additional search of the property. It's a rural property. You can see on the map, it's several acres in a rural area, and so they had a couple canine search dogs, like the search and rescue coordinator described, walk around the property and see. They didn't detect anything.
All right, so essentially cadaver dogs to see if there are any bodies buried.
Correct.
And that search resulted in no information and no indication that there was any bodies or anything at the site. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. So we've walked through pretty quickly your investigation, and I knew it took some significant period of time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to your testimony here today that I know we've kind of done it in broad brush form, but I think it's given the jury sufficient information to kind of get an understanding of at least what was happening in Clark County and what your agency did and the follow-ups and this kind of thing. So anything else you'd like to add?
Well, the only thing that I would say is, and I said it before, is you see a nice timeline with all that stuff, but as the investigation unfolds, we didn't have a lot of the information. As we're learning it in retrospect, we can put together this timeline. But if you're trying to understand what happened and how it happened, it's important to keep in mind that as the first officers show up at the scene, they have no idea that there was a family in the car or anything, and then it just kind of evolves bit by bit, and we get different pieces of information. So this is definitely good and important, but also keep in mind that as we're investigating, we're always constantly learning new information as we go. So that's it.
What I'm going to take is we're going to take a 5-minute break, and it's a stand in your place and stretch your legs rather than everybody gets to leave and all that. So we're going to go off the record right now. There are a couple little points I want to look at and see if I want to ask the detective. Otherwise, we'll release him. And I know I occasionally get a question, which is helpful too. So everyone can stand in your place. We are off the record.